Welcome to the Israel Illuminated channel. Today we will examine the topic, why did God put Jerusalem at the center of the nations? Have you ever wondered why God chose such a tiny piece of land to reveal himself to the world? Why not China, India, Europe, or somewhere else? Why Israel? Why Jerusalem? The answer may be found in one remarkable verse that many people overlook. Ezekiel 5:5 says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. This is Jerusalem, which I have set in the center of the nations, with countries all around her." This is an extraordinary statement. God himself declares that he placed Jerusalem in the midst of the nations. But why? Was this merely symbolic, or was there also a practical reason? Actually, the Bible, history, and geography together point to an incredible answer. From the very beginning, God's plan was never limited to one nation. When God called Abraham, he promised, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed," shown in Genesis 12:3. Israel was never chosen simply to receive God's blessings. Israel was chosen to become the instrument through which those blessings would reach every nation. This is why God told Israel at Mount Sinai, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation," written in Exodus 19:6. A priest represents God before people. Israel was called to be God's teacher among the nations. Isaiah later expands this mission. "I will also make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth," shown in Isaiah 49:6. Notice that God's purpose was always global. Now think about geography. If God wanted his truth to spread throughout the ancient world, where would be the best place to establish his people? Not on an isolated island, not deep inside one continent, but at the crossroads where civilizations met. That is exactly where Israel is located. For thousands of years, Israel formed the narrow land bridge connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. This is the natural land bridge between Africa and Asia while opening onto the eastern Mediterranean toward Europe. Jerusalem, located in the heart of that land, sat at the crossroads of the ancient world's great trade and travel networks. Every major empire passed through this corridor: the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Romans. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient highways that confirm this strategic location. Roads such as the Via Maris, the King's Highway, China's Silk Road, and other trade routes connected Egypt with Mesopotamia and beyond. Merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, soldiers, and travelers continually moved through the land. Imagine the world before the internet, television, radio, or printing presses. Information spread because people traveled. Every traveler who entered Israel had the opportunity to encounter the people of the God of Israel. When they returned home, they carried stories, ideas, customs, and sometimes even faith with them. God did not place his message in isolation. He placed it where the nations were constantly passing by. Today, people often speak of the 1040 window, the region between roughly 10 and 40 degrees north latitude. This area stretches from North Africa through the Middle East into Asia. It contains many of the world's largest populations and many of the least reached people groups. The Americas are also significant in land area, but comparatively less significant in population. The Bible never mentions the 1040 window, but it is interesting that Jerusalem lies at about 31.8 degrees north latitude, right within this region. Even more remarkable is the distribution of the world's population. Today, nearly 90% of humanity lives in the Eastern Hemisphere. Asia alone contains about 60% of the world's population. Europe, the Middle East, India, China, and North Africa form one enormous population belt. While Jerusalem is not necessarily the mathematical center of the world's population, it is remarkably close to humanity's demographic heart compared with cities such as New York, Tokyo, or Shanghai. This makes Ezekiel 5:5 even more fascinating. God placed Jerusalem where the greatest concentration of humanity has historically existed. But God's plan did not stop with geography. After Israel repeatedly turned away from him, God scattered his people among the nations. At first glance, the Jewish diaspora appears to be only an act of judgment. But could God also have used it for redemption? Genesis 10 records the descendants of Noah's three sons or people groups, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. According to Genesis 10:1-31, Japheth went to Europe, Shem went to Asia, and Ham went to Africa. Over the centuries, Jewish communities likewise became established throughout these same regions. Jewish communities flourished in Europe. They settled throughout Babylon, Persia, Yemen, India, and other parts of Asia. They lived in Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, and North Africa. A remarkable historical pattern can be seen in Israel's relationship to the three families of Noah. The Israelites were also dispersed in three major diasporas throughout the centuries to these three sections or people groups of the world. They were first dispersed with Moses to live in Egypt among peoples associated with Ham in Africa between 1876 to 1446 BC. They were later exiled to Babylon and Persia to live among peoples associated with Shem in Asia between 605 to 538 BC, and after 132 to 135 AD, they were widely dispersed mainly to live throughout Europe and later the Americas, traditionally associated with Japheth to our present day. God said Israel would be scattered among the nations. God also said Israel would be a light to the nations. Perhaps even the diaspora became part of God's providential plan to the witness to the three sons of Noah. Wherever Jewish communities settled, they carried the scriptures. They preserved the Hebrew language. They established synagogues. They proclaimed the coming Messiah. By the first century, synagogues existed throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. This helps explain why Paul almost always began his ministry in synagogues. The book of Acts repeatedly tells us that Paul entered the synagogue first before preaching to the surrounding Gentile population. God had already prepared a network that stretched across much of the known world. Even maritime travel supports this remarkable picture. Long before airplanes or railroads, ships connected the Mediterranean with ports throughout Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Israel's position allowed merchants traveling by land or sea to encounter God's people before continuing their journeys. Israel was also not only positioned at the crossroads of major land routes, it could also be approached by sea from two different directions. To the west and northwest lay the Mediterranean Sea, while to the south lay the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea. This gave the land of Israel access to the great maritime networks of both the Mediterranean world and the lands farther south and east. From the Mediterranean, ships from the west could approach ports such as Jaffa, as well as Akko, Caesarea, and Gaza. These ports connected the land of Israel with Egypt, Phoenicia, Asia Minor, Greece, Rome, North Africa, and the islands of the Mediterranean. Israel also had maritime access from the south. At the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba were the ancient ports of Elath and Etzion Geber. The Gulf of Aqaba forms the northeastern arm of the Red Sea that would eventually reach the east. Ships sailing back and forth from this region could travel south through the Red Sea toward Arabia, northeastern Africa, and eventually the waters leading toward the Indian Ocean and to China. In other words, if you could reach the oceans, you could also reach Israel from any part of the world. Again, this alone demonstrates that God placed Israel in one of the most strategic locations imaginable. The prophets also tell us this central role has not ended. Isaiah declares, "For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Shown in Isaiah 2:3. Micah repeats the same prophecy. Zechariah says that the nations will one day come annually to Jerusalem to worship the King. Isaiah 19:23 to 25 even foresees a future highway connecting Egypt, Assyria, and Israel, demonstrating that God will once again make Israel a meeting place for the nations. The ancient highways may have faded with modern shipping and aviation, but the prophets foresee international connections being restored in the Messianic kingdom. Finally, consider this. How did the ancient Israelites know they lived at the crossroads of the known world? They had no satellites, no GPS, no global maps. Yet Scripture shows God declaring that He had placed Jerusalem in the midst of the nations, like a hub. Thousands of years later, archaeology, geography, and history all reveal just how strategically positioned Israel truly was. The Bible's primary message is that God intentionally chose Jerusalem as the center of His redemptive plan. From Abraham came the covenant. From Israel came the Scriptures. From Jerusalem came the temple. From Jerusalem came the Messiah. From Jerusalem, the gospel first went out into the world. And according to biblical prophecy, Jerusalem will one day become the place where all nations gather to worship the King. The same city that stood at the crossroads of the ancient world will one day stand at the center of God's kingdom on earth. Perhaps that is why Ezekiel 5:5 is so profound. God did not randomly choose Jerusalem. He placed it exactly where He wanted it, at the crossroads of the nations, so that His light could shine outward to the entire world. Thank you for watching the Israel Illuminated channel. If you like our channel, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.